years in the United States of America. And as a gift to our country, you have written a new book. Bernie, tell us about the book.
Oh, thank you, Bob. The book is called Reimagining America's Dream, Making It Attainable for Everybody. So as a 7-year-old boy, I had an uncle from Canada who used to come over every summer with his family and tell me about North America. I was so young I didn't know the difference between Canada and the USA. 2 years later, my dad's cousin, Uncle Percy, was an executive with Vicks Pharmaceuticals, came over to build a factory in England and near Liverpool, where I grew up, and told me all about America and his New York Yankees. So the American dream was instilled in me at a very young age. Obviously, I came over at age 21 to be a summer camp counselor up in Maine, and then came to go to grad school at age 23 in 1973. So here I am 50 years later, having lived the American dream. The book number one is Thank You, America, for adopting me, allowing me to come and live and enjoy this incredible experience for myself and my family. And secondly, I recognize in those 50 years that it has not been attainable for everybody. There is a generation, and particularly poor people, particularly minorities, that don't have access to the dream. I think the dream is amazing, and the book is about how do we make that happen.
Bernie, you mentioned the book. You're flying into JFK. The wheels are about to hit the tarmac, and you get your first view of America, which is New York City. And you see the people and the traffic and the freeways and everything else that comes with the hustle and bustle of New York. Was it what you had imagined from all the storytelling from your family to when you got here?
Kind of, sort of, yes and no. Bigger. I mean, the reality was bigger. The America really that I had in my head was Kojak. It was Miami Vice. I mean, it was, everybody had a gun and everybody was shooting everybody. So that was a little bit of it. Certainly by the time I got up to Maine for the summer camp and by the time I came back and went to Kansas for grad school, you realize what the opportunity is in America. I still don't know the answer of whether I repressed myself in England. In other words, it was my own thinking that limited my ability. When you see my career, Bob, having been a chief executive in Major League Sports, I should have been the chief executive officer for Everton Football Club, a Premier League club that I saw their first game at age 5 with my dad. He was a season ticket holder. But I never allowed myself that thinking. So I don't know if it's a cap I put on my own thinking in England. I think in part yes, in part no. When I think about America and how banks had loaned me money to start businesses and ideas I had, that entrepreneurship, that support for entrepreneurship, the opportunity to be whatever you can be in America, I think distinguishes it.
The title of the book is Reimagining. Take us over the 50-year span. How does it need to be reimagined today from 50 years ago when you first arrived?
Well, I think I'd like to think we've changed and improved in so many areas, but I think if you look at politics as a single, place to point to, in America, we've regressed. All the stories are, Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan would go out, have a steak dinner, entirely too much wine, connect over their Irish heritage and decide what they could agree on between Republicans and Democrats and get it done and make their parties fall in line. I don't think that's happening as much today, although I applaud Speaker Johnson in terms of what he's just done with the foreign aid bill and to what extent that's tied into the spending bill. We need more of that. So I think in 50 years, we've gone from listening to understand, accepting our differences, agreeing to disagree, to We have very different approaches on life, and you're bad and evil because your approach is different from mine. And I think what's going on right now with the Gaza protests, with some of the pro-Palestinian demonstrations, perfectly okay with pro-Palestinian demonstrations, just don't make it anti-Semitic and don't make it genocidal. We've got a young generation that will chant from the river to the sea and not understand what from the river to the sea means, the elimination of a country and of a people. And that's okay. I don't think it's okay. I think it's perfectly okay to be pro-Palestinian and be supportive, but not pro-Hamas and not anti-Israel. At the same time, being supportive and providing weaponry for the Israelis, to who knows how many Palestinians in Gaza have been killed and are being starved to death. It's incomprehensible to me in 2024 to think that can happen.
Your book is one of hope. It is one of a plan. Share with us, if you would, Bernie, some of the nuts and bolts about how you envision the change taking place.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. It's definitely hopeful. I've always been an optimist, and I have a phrase which I share with my family, Bob, that is, as long as children are being born, there's always hope. Young kids, innocence, freedom, as long as they're not poisoned in the mind by their own parents and their own bias and their own thinking, I think there's always hope. So I think there's definitely hope for America. It's the greatest country on earth, without a shadow of a doubt. I've lived in Europe, obviously grew up there, lived in America for 50 years. This is the greatest country. And anybody that doubts that or challenges that, look at all the people that are willing to die to get in here. Look at the people that are coming from China, for God's sake, through Mexico, or Venezuela through Central America to Mexico. Look at all the people that are willing to get on boats. There are so many people that recognize what we have here, and I think we sometimes forget that. So that's the hope part. So what is the essence of the guts of the book? Reimagining America's dream subliminally is RAD, R-A-D. R for Republicans, D for Democrats, A for Americans in the middle. It's about, according to Pew Research, the 65% of Americans that are independent, centrists, neutral, for the most part, sitting in the middle, who are allowing the screaming voices to the left and the screaming voices to the right and the nastiness to go on. It's about awakening us, because that's where I sit. I see myself as a fiscal conservative with a warm heart and a social conscience. We need to stand up and shout and say, stop it. Stop your extremities on the left, stop your extremities on the right, and come together in what's best for the country. And so the book, the centrality of the book is, according to Pew Research, the top 10 topics that Americans are voting on. So what are the top 10 social issues in America right now that are causing people to vote one way or the other? And number one, it's always going to be the income stupid. It's always going to be the economy. It's going to be poverty. We have the highest level of poverty of any country on the earth, and yet we are the most productive, according to GDP, economy in the world. That's wrong. We have to stop that. So the solution there is a federal minimum wage, minimum $15 an hour. So the dignity of a full-time job is $30,000 minimum. You can live and feed your family on that, depending on how big your family is, of course. That's number one. Number two, the ability to pass on the American dream has been manifest, perhaps wrongly, as a house of your own, but generational wealth. I look back at my own life. My dad sold life insurance. My dad died when I was 21. My mother gave me 4,000 pounds, about $6,000 or $7,000. I bought a house. I sold it for twice what I paid for it 4 years later. That's the money I brought to Kansas, and I had a house built in Kansas for me to live in. And when you look at me today, most of my wealth is real estate that comes from me having that head start. So income is always going to be number one. Number two is education. And the book is about free preschool for every kid in America, free latchkey daycare, preschool, post-school for shift workers, people that need that. Then it is about a prescription in high school, starting with an 8-week boot camp where those kids get paid minimum wage. So they get $5,000 for sleeping away for 8 weeks with other kids, black, white, brown, whatever, rich, poor, whatever, learning how to be an American citizen and an adult. I mean, they are the ones that actually have to cook and prep the meals. So you think about an inner city kid that's used to living, their parent goes to a food desert. So Monday is McDonald's, Tuesday's Domino's, Wednesday's out of a can, for the dinner. Nothing wrong with McDonald's and Domino's, but not a regular diet. And certainly not, no fruit, no fresh produce, those kind of things. So it goes on from there in the top 10 social issues, but the big one is solving poverty, solving the income problem, creating generational wealth, and doing that through giving kids an opportunity to get free education so the parent doesn't have to have a second job. They can be there to actually be with the kids, read with the kids, teach them how to read and write so they go into kindergarten able to succeed.
There is also a foundation aspect to this. Where the kind of the rubber meets the road as all this comes to fruition. Explain, Bernie, about the foundation and how this is going to augment the book.
Absolutely, Bob. In 1988, I got divorced. I had 3 kids, 13, 11, and 8. They stayed in the home with me. I had majority of the custody. And no dad got that in 1988. And I got it because at that time my wife didn't really, wasn't ready to have the kids. So later on she stepped back in, thank God. But it terrified me. I was making 6 figures as an executive with the Pittsburgh Pirates, and it took 3 months to find the right nanny to really settle. And I realized how debilitating that was for me as a successful executive with the income, able to get a high-quality nanny, a young lady who was in university to be a teacher, who was phenomenal. So I was very blessed. So that's the first part. And then my executive assistant at my company, the Aspire Group, is a single parent as well with two boys. And so together, when I quit the Aspire Group and semi-retired, created the foundation targeting single parents, men and women, with preschool kids, because I believe in education. I was a professor at the University of Massachusetts Amherst for 10 years and saw what education can and cannot do. And you look back to it, the starting point is kindergarten. And so what we want to do is fund the mental health of the caregiver, first and foremost, so the stability there. Then the home. Ideally not in the hood, not in a high-risk area, but a good quality home. And then education so that child goes into kindergarten able to read and write. They can write the alphabet, they can do basic sentences, and they can do basic math. And they're socialized to listen to their teacher and get along with their peers. So it's a foundation that has very, very high accountability and measurability standards. Is what we've created, and all the proceeds from the book and from all the consulting I do goes to fund that. The goal being 100 families between Atlanta, Georgia, where we lived till last August, and now Denver, Colorado, where we live near our kids and grandkids now.
You've alluded to it a few times in our chat about your sports background at the highest levels. From the NBA to Major League Baseball to hockey and et cetera. And I was wondering, how do you think you can use your background and what you've been exposed to in professional and collegiate sports to apply that to the social problems that you want to address in the book?
It's a great question. And I wouldn't have been able to answer it anywhere near as well having not written the book. So I basically flubbed and, it around for 3 years writing chapters of the book. I then, we were on vacation in Costa Rica with the co-author on my sport marketing book. And he looked at me and he said, "You're never going to write that book." And I was offended. And I looked at him and I go, "What do you suggest?" "Get a ghostwriter." So I Googled best business ghostwriters in Atlanta, Georgia, because we were still living in Atlanta. 10 names came up. Top 3 I did research on, and then I phoned the number 1 guy. So I emailed back and forward and phoned the number 1 guy. And so I called Dr. Paul Skade. And I said, "Paul, where do you live?" And he says, "I live in Williston." And I said, "Oh, what state's that in?" He goes, "It's in the Wirral." I said, "The Wirral, Cheshire?" He goes, "Yes, the peninsula across from Liverpool, England, where I grew up." And I said to him, "Do you ever go to the Black Horse pub?" He goes, "Yeah, I go there once in a while." I go, "I used to be a bartender in college there. It's where my parents bought their house to retire." So, serendipity, right? So I got a ghostwriter who'd won numerous awards for writing. So finally start to write the book, with him. So interviews twice a week, he writes the book, and yet it's with my voice. So that's progress. How does that relate to sport? And the key question you asked. At the end of a year of working with my ghostwriter, he says, "Dr. Bernie Mullin, you are a community builder. What you have done in your career, starting with the Pirates, going to the Colorado Rockies and starting that, going to a minor league hockey team, the Denver Grizzlies, going to the NBA and going to the University of Denver, to take them to Division I athletics, going to the NBA, going to the Hawks and Thrashers. You build communities of fans." And so when I left the Hawks, what did the Aspire Group do for 16 years? Generated $1.75 billion in revenue for the over 300 clients we served by building their communities. What's the book? The book is building the community of those of us in the middle of America who are moderates, who are conservatives to some extent financially, but have warm heart, social conscience, sit in the middle, want everybody to enjoy the American dream. That's who I am. That's what I am. That's what the book's written about. And that's what the foundation is designed in a small way, just in Atlanta, in Denver, to build.
What is it about building a sports community, in the community of sports? What is it that they get right that America could learn from?
Well, I think I'm a storyteller. So the story I'll tell you is 9/11. I am in my office in New York. I've commuted in on the train, come up to my office. My executive assistant is crying her eyes out on the phone. And I'm like, "Joanne, what's going on?" I hired Joanne from Cantor Fitzgerald. Cantor Fitzgerald is the company that lost over 700 employees that day. She is talking to 3 of her closest friends in the Cantor Fitzgerald office, stuck in the World Trade Center, all of whom died. So you go back to that day, seeing the second plane hit, which is when we realized what was going on. The first plane is like, what a kind of an accident. And that's not a little commuter plane. That's a commercial plane. 3 miles away at 50th and 5th, which is where the NBA offices were. You could tell it was a large commercial plane that hit the World Trade Center. So you go through that experience, you go through the days afterwards, and then David Stern, commissioner of the NBA, goes, by the way, Mullin, you're senior VP of marketing and team business. You have to work with the teams on how we're going to launch the league, in deference to what's gone on to this country, and at the same time moving on and basically giving the finger to Osama bin Laden. You will not affect us. We are going to be bigger, stronger, and better. We're going to respect what's happened, but we're going to move on. That challenge, how do you do that? How important is life? Well, the answer to your question, Bob, is it's where a community expresses itself is in sports. It's where the community comes together collectively, whether the team is in the playoffs, as we've got going on right now in the NBA and the NHL. It doesn't matter. It's where the community comes together. So how do you bring that community together? They've learned that. They've learned how to do that, and if I go back to being 13 and we had the boys' pen at Goodison Park, Everton Football Club, for a shilling, for a dime, you went into the boys' pen. And there were some of the toughest, meanest, nastiest young people who supported the same team that I did, but could see just by my dress that I was middle class. I'd grown up in blue collar, but I was middle class by then, and would spit in my face. Same team, So how do you build a community that you would jump up and down and hug each other, strangers, when they scored a goal and you won the game? How do you build that community? And I think sports has learned that.
This book will be out in the spring. It'll carry, obviously, as the wheels start to turn. It'll be through the summer, into the fall, and here we are in the throes of a political season. Let me throw a hypothetical at you as we end our conversation. If President Biden and President Trump were in here with us right now, and you have an autographed copy of the book to hand each of them, and you had an audience, just the two of them, what would you say to them?
It's got to stop. The nastiness has got to stop. You are leaders of this country, and you need to lead by example. And you've got one presidential candidate in former President Trump who's going to be in court almost through the entire campaigning season. It's wrong. I'm not saying him being in court is wrong. It's his actions that have led to him being in court that's wrong. On the other side, President Biden, I believe that the way you got yourself nominated was to sell your soul to the left. And I think that's a mistake. I think you're appeasing the extreme left too much. The majority of America is the 65%, according to Pew Research, that sit in the middle or near left and near right. And that's what we want is leadership, and we want to come together, and we want reasonable opportunity for everybody. There are things you can do and you must do. We shouldn't have a fight over the governmental budget every single time that goes on for months and months to the brink of shutting the government down. That is not in the best interest of this country. We want moral leadership. We want political leadership. We want things to happen that are for all Americans. You've got, 25, 30 million people living in poverty in this country, in the richest country on earth. That's wrong. What are you going to do with a national minimum wage that needs to be there for people? Do that. Just do the top two things that we already talked about. Number one, deal with poverty, deal with the ability to create wealth, deal with the ability to give people the opportunity to truly live the American dream that 25, 30 million people have got no chance of right now in America. Solve that. Education is the key to learning, growing, and achieving the American dream. Give quality education to the inner city and rural poor, the poorest school districts where it's not going on right now. Start there. Just agree on those two things.